Dinner invitation came in a cream envelope with a wax seal. That should have been my first warning. My in-laws didn't do cream envelopes. They did group texts with 3-day notice and an expectation that you'd rearrange your entire schedule around their convenience. A wax seal meant they wanted this to feel ceremonial, significant, like something you couldn't say no to. I almost didn't open it. I was standing in the kitchen of my condo in a bathrobe at 6 in the morning, holding a mug of coffee that was too hot to drink, and I turned that envelope over in my hands for a solid 2 minutes before I slid my finger under the flap. The paper inside was thick, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. You are cordially invited to a family dinner at the Ashworth residence. Saturday, the 14th, 7 o'clock. Formal attire. We have important matters to discuss regarding the future of our family. Signed by my mother-in-law, not her first name. Her full name, like a legal document. I set down the envelope. I picked up my coffee. I stood at the window and watched the sun come up over the skyline, and I thought, they've finally decided to make their move. My name is Vivienne, and for the past 4 years, I have been the wife of Ashworth Industries' eldest son. I have attended their galas and their charity auctions and their Sunday brunches where everything on the table cost 3 times what I grew up spending on groceries for a week. I have smiled at the right moments and worn the right clothes and referred to my mother-in-law as Constance instead of what I actually thought of her. I have done all of this while building something they didn't know existed, something I had been quietly constructing, piece by piece, in the hours before they woke up and after they went to sleep. But we'll get to that. What you need to know first is this. Before I ever set foot in that dining room on the 14th, before I straightened my dress in the mirror in the hallway and smoothed my hair and took one long, slow breath, I already knew exactly what they were going to ask me to do, and I had already decided what I was going to say. The Ashworth house is in Westchester, a 40-minute drive from the city depending on traffic. Stone facade, 6 bedrooms, a circular driveway that my husband's father had repaved twice because he didn't like the color of the original gravel. Constance had once told me, with complete sincerity, that the fountain in the front courtyard had been imported from a village in southern France. She said it like she expected me to be impressed. I nodded and said, "It's beautiful," and inside I was doing the math on what that fountain cost versus what it would have meant to my mother when I was 9 years old, and she was working double shifts at the hospital in Akron to keep the lights on. The housekeeper, a woman named Philippa who had been with the family for over a decade and who had always been quietly, carefully kind to me, opened the door before I even knocked. She looked at me. Her expression didn't change, exactly, but something moved behind her eyes, something that looked like it wanted to warn me. "They're in the sitting room," she said. "All of them. All of them." That was the part that should have made me turn around. My husband was there, standing near the fireplace with a glass of bourbon he wasn't drinking. My mother-in-law sat in her usual chair like it was a throne, wearing a charcoal blazer and a double strand of pearls that I happened to know were insured for $300,000. My father-in-law, Roland, sat across from her, reading glasses on, a stack of papers on the ottoman in front of him. And beside my husband, close enough that their arms were nearly touching, stood Courtney. Courtney is my husband's younger sister. She has an MBA from Wharton, a LinkedIn profile that reads like a greatest hits album, and an opinion about everything I have ever done or said or worn in the presence of their family. She had never once spoken to me with anything other than the particular brand of warmth that rich people use when they want you to know they find you amusing. Nobody said hello. My husband looked at the floor. That was the moment I understood the shape of what was about to happen. Not the specifics, but the shape. Vivienne. Constance said my name the way she always did, with a small pause before it, like she was reminding herself to use it. "We're glad you came. Please sit down." I sat. Roland leaned forward and slid the papers across the ottoman toward me. I looked down. The top page had the letterhead of a firm I recognized, DeCure Paulson, one of the most expensive family law practices in the state of New York. "A postnuptial agreement. We've had this prepared," Roland said, "for the good of the family." I didn't pick it up. I looked at my husband. He was still looking at the floor. "The good of the family," I said. "We have concerns," Constance said. Her voice had that precise, calibrated quality it got when she'd rehearsed. About the nature of certain financial decisions that have been made in recent years. About the long-term stability of our family's assets. Ashworth Industries has a legacy, a reputation, and we feel that a formal agreement protecting those interests is. What my mother is trying to say, Courtney cut in, because she always cut in, is that we don't think you're the right long-term fit, and rather than let this become messier than it needs to be, we thought it was better to handle it cleanly. Now, while there's still goodwill, she said goodwill like it was a gift she was offering me. I looked at the document again. I didn't read it, I'd already read it. My attorney had received a courtesy copy 3 days prior, sent by Decker Paulson in what they probably thought was a magnanimous gesture. My attorney, a woman named Cecile who had been practicing corporate and family law for 22 years, and who had the resting expression of someone who has seen everything, had called me immediately. They're moving to reclassify marital assets as family trust property, she'd said. If you sign this, you walk away with a settlement that looks generous on paper and is meaningless in practice. You'd be waiving any future claim to Ashworth Holdings, any residual stake in affiliated entities. I know, I told her. I know exactly what it is. So I sat in that sitting room, in the house with the French fountain, and I let them explain it to me like I was someone who needed it explained. Constance talked about legacy. Roland talked about fiduciary responsibility. Courtney talked about what was best for everyone, by which she meant what was best for the family, minus me. My husband said nothing. I'd spent 4 years being surprised by that. I wasn't surprised anymore. We'd like you to sign tonight, Constance said. We've arranged for a notary to be available. It really is the simplest path forward, Vivienne, for all of us. I looked at each of them in turn. Roland, who had shaken my hand at our wedding and said he was glad to have me. Constance, who had once told me at a dinner party, when she'd had 1 glass too many of the good Chardonnay, that she'd always imagined her son marrying a girl from Greenwich. Courtney, who had never once in 4 years asked me a single question about my life before I married into hers. And my husband, who was looking at his shoes. No, I said. The room went very still. No? Constance repeated it like I'd said a word in a language she didn't recognize. No, I said again. I'm not signing that. Roland sat back. Constance's jaw tightened. Courtney reached for her phone. Vivienne, Roland said, and his voice had shifted now, dropped into something lower, something that expected to be obeyed. Let me be very direct with you. We have documentation that raises questions about certain expenditures you've made over the course of this marriage. Large transfers, unexplained capital flows, the kind of things that, taken out of context, could look very much like financial misconduct. Now, we have no interest in involving anyone outside this room, but if you're unwilling to come to a reasonable agreement, you're threatening me, I said. We're offering you an alternative, Courtney said smoothly. Sign now, walk away with $2 million and your dignity, or we make some phone calls that get significantly less comfortable for you. I set my clutch on the table. I reached inside it. I took out a single folded piece of paper and I placed it on top of the postnuptial agreement. What is that? Constance asked. Open it, I said. Roland unfolded it. I watched his face. He was a man who had spent 40 years being the most powerful person in any room he entered. I watched the moment that stopped being true. The paper was a 1-page summary, my attorney's summary, of the ownership structure of a company called Vantage Point Capital Partners, a private equity firm, registered in Delaware, operating quietly for 6 years, with a current portfolio value of just under $2 billion. The largest single investor in Ashworth Industries' last 3 funding rounds, me. You see, I said, while Courtney was getting her MBA, I was getting my Series 65. While you were deciding I wasn't the right fit, I was building the fund that kept your company solvent through the 2022 contraction. When Ashworth Industries needed a bridge loan in the 4th quarter of last year because Roland's expansion into the southeast didn't perform the way the projections said it would, it was my capital that made that call. You just didn't know whose name was behind the LLC. The sound that came out of Constance's mouth wasn't a word, it was something that started as a sentence and couldn't finish itself. That's not possible, Roland said. His voice had gone thin. I can have Cecile send over the full documentation if you'd like, I said, though I assume you'll want to have your own people verify it. I'd recommend moving quickly. There are some time-sensitive matters we need to discuss. What time-sensitive matters? Courtney asked. She was still holding her phone, but she'd forgotten she was holding it. Vantage Point's investor agreement with Ashworth Industries includes a clause, I said. Standard language in our contracts. In the event of a material change in the principal's domestic circumstances, divorce, legal separation, formal dispute, the fund reserves the right to review its position, including calling any outstanding bridge instruments. The one from last quarter matures in 60 days. I let that sit for a moment. You built a $2 billion fund, my husband said. It was the first time he'd spoken since I arrived. He was looking at me now, finally. I built a $2 billion fund, I confirmed. And you never told me. You never asked what I did when I wasn't at your family dinners. There was a long silence. Outside, I could hear the wind moving through the trees in the courtyard, and somewhere in the house, the low sound of a television in a room nobody was using. Then Courtney made a sound. Not a laugh, exactly. More like air leaving a balloon. This is a bluff, she said. You're bluffing. Call Cecile, I said. I slid her business card across the table. She's available tonight. You can't just come in here and... Courtney stopped. Restarted. Even if this is real, you can't call a bridge note in 60 days. That would destroy the Meridian deal. We'd lose the entire Southeast expansion. I know, I said. Then you know we can't let you walk out of here without a resolution. I looked at her for a moment. Courtney, who had spent 4 years looking at me like I was temporary furniture, who had once, at Christmas, told her mother in a voice just loud enough for me to hear that at least they didn't have to worry about her spending the family money. Actually, I said, I don't think you have much say in what I do when I walk out of here. Roland had picked up the summary sheet again and was reading it more carefully now. I watched the color of his face change the way skies change before a storm, slowly and then all at once. There's a holding company, he said. Vantage Point holds a position in Hartwell Group which holds... He stopped. Looked up. You own the property management firm that administers 3 of our commercial leases. 4, I said. The Clifton Street property transferred to Hartwell's portfolio in August. Your CFO signed off on it, actually. I have the documents if you need a refresher. My mother-in-law stood up. She was a woman who had always used height as authority. She stood when she wanted to end conversations, when she wanted to make pronouncements, when she wanted to remind you that this was her house and you were in it by her permission. This is extortion, she said. This is a business meeting, I said. You called it, not me. I just came prepared. The room had gone completely still. The kind of stillness that happens when people realize the floor they were standing on is not where they thought it was. I reached back into my clutch and took out a second document. This one was longer, 12 pages, tabbed, formatted the way Cecile's office formatted everything, clean and precise and completely unambiguous. This is a revised partnership agreement, I said. Vantage Point will maintain its position in Ashworth Industries and roll the bridge note into a standard long-term instrument. The Meridian deal proceeds on schedule. You get everything you want from that expansion. In exchange, I continued, my husband and I will be pursuing a standard dissolution. No postnuptial agreement, no reclassification of assets, no Decker-Paulson maneuvers. My attorney handles it. Your attorney handles it. We divide what is actually ours to divide. And we move on. The Ashworth Family Trust is not affected. Your legacy, and I said that word the way Constance had said it, carefully, deliberately, remains intact. And if we don't agree, Courtney said. Then Vantage Point reviews its position, I said. The bridge note comes due. The Meridian deal falls apart. And I spend the next 6 months being very thorough about which Ashworth Industries affiliates I choose to continue investing in. I stood up. I straightened my dress. I placed the 12-page document on top of the postnuptial agreement that they had prepared for me, the one they had expected me to sign tonight, like a woman with nowhere else to go. You have until Monday, I said. Cecile's number is on the last page. I picked up my clutch. I walked toward the door. Vivienne. My mother-in-law's voice was different now. The throne quality was gone. Something smaller had replaced it, something I hadn't heard from her before. How long? How long did you know about the bridge note? I stopped. I thought about it. There was a memory that came to me then, and I let myself have it for a moment before I answered her. It was from 2 years earlier, almost exactly. A Sunday brunch, early spring, the table set with the good china, I had just closed Vantage Point's first 9-figure deal, a position in a logistics company that had tripled in value within 18 months. I remember sitting at that table, cutting a piece of French toast, listening to Constance tell the table about Courtney's latest board appointment, and thinking, none of them know. They are looking at me and they see a girl who married their son and doesn't contribute anything of value, and they have no idea. And I remember deciding, in that moment, to let them keep not knowing. A little longer. Just a little longer. I've known about the bridge note, I told Constance, since the day your CFO called mine to arrange the terms. I paused. Your CFO doesn't know who his counterpart works for. He was very professional about it. I walked out. Philippa was standing in the hallway. She had my coat ready. I didn't know if she'd heard any of it or none of it, but she helped me into my coat with the careful, quiet efficiency she brought to everything, and when she opened the front door, she looked at me with that same expression from before. The one that had wanted to warn me. Only this time it looked a little like something else. "Good night, Mrs. Ashworth," she said. "Good night, Philippa," I said. The night air was cold and clean. The gravel of the circular driveway crunched under my heels. The French fountain was lit from below, the water catching the light in a way that was actually quite beautiful. And I looked at it for a moment and thought about the village it came from, and whether anyone in that village had ever stood next to it feeling exactly the way I felt right now. I got in my car. My phone rang before I'd reached the end of the driveway. "Cecile, how'd it go?" she asked. "They need until Monday," I said. "They'll call tomorrow," she said. "Roland's not a man who sits on things." "I know," I said. She was right. Roland called the next morning at 9. He was brief, precise, and entirely without the authority he'd had 24 hours earlier. They accepted the terms. The postnuptial agreement was withdrawn. Decker Paulson filed a notice of disengagement the following week. The divorce took 4 months. It was not ugly, which surprised some people. It didn't surprise me. When the other party understands the full shape of the situation, things tend to move efficiently. What I didn't expect was the call from my mother-in-law in month 3. She called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the office, going over projections with my portfolio manager, and when I saw her name on my screen, I almost didn't pick up. But I did. She didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. But she said something that I've thought about since. She said, "I underestimated you. I want you to know that I understand that now." That was all. I said, "Thank you, Constance," and I meant it, not because it fixed anything. Not because it made the 4 years of Sunday brunches and careful smiles and swallowed comments feel worthwhile, but because she didn't have to say it, and she said it anyway, and that meant something. Some people are capable of looking at the truth, even when it cost them. The Meridian deal closed in March. Ashworth Industries made the announcement on a Thursday and the stock moved 8 points by Friday afternoon. Vantage Point's position appreciated accordingly. Cecile sent me a bottle of something expensive. I opened it on the balcony of my apartment on the Saturday morning when the city was just starting to wake up. And I had one glass. And I thought about the girl who drove herself to college in a 12-year-old Honda with $300 and a FAFSA application in the passenger seat. That girl worked 4 jobs and graduated in 3 years and took every finance course offered and spent her evenings reading SEC filings the way other people watch TV. That girl got her license and cold called investors at 26 and closed her first fund at 29 and looked calm at every single brunch while people talked over her. That girl knew exactly what she was doing the whole time. I poured the rest of the coffee I'd made and I looked out at the skyline and I thought, I didn't lose a family. I survived an audition for one that was never going to cast me right anyway. I set down the glass. I went back inside. I had a call at 9. People ask me sometimes if I regret keeping it a secret for so long. 4 years is a long time to sit at someone's table and let them look through you. And I understand why the question comes up. It looks, from the outside, like I was hiding. Like I was afraid. I wasn't hiding. I was watching. I was watching. There's a difference between a woman who stays quiet because she has no power and a woman who stays quiet because she's still deciding how to use it. I knew which one I was. Constance and Roland never did. That was the gap between us. And I was the only one who knew how wide it actually ran. What I've come to understand about situations like mine. Situations where someone has been told, repeatedly and in 100 different small ways, that they are less than, is that the people doing the telling are never as certain as they appear. Constance's sharpness at those Sunday bringes, the way Roland spoke over me in conversations about Ashworth's financials, Courtney's particular brand of warmth that never quite reached her eyes. None of that was confidence. It was maintenance. They were maintaining a story about who I was because the alternative, the true version, threatened something in them they couldn't name. I used to think it was cruelty. I don't think that anymore. I think it was fear dressed up in cashmere and a Westchester address. The thing about building something quietly is that you learn yourself in a way that other people don't get to. When nobody's watching, when nobody's investing in your success or taking credit for your progress, you find out very quickly what you're actually made of. Every decision I made with Vantage Point was mine alone. Every miscalculation, every correction, every late-night reading a balance sheet when I could have been sleeping. Mine. That's not a complaint. That's the gift buried inside being underestimated. They freed me from the noise of their expectations, and in the silence, I built something real. I don't think the universe keeps a ledger. I don't think there's some cosmic accounting system that tracks what we're owed and delivers it on schedule. But I do think that choices compound. Roland's choice to treat me as furniture compounded into 4 years of not knowing who held his bridge note. Constance's choice to dismiss me at every turn compounded into the look on her face when she unfolded that one-page summary. Courtney's choice to never once ask me a real question about my life compounded into the moment she realized she didn't know the first thing about who she was dealing with. And my choices compounded too. Every hour I spent building instead of performing. Every moment I chose clarity over resentment. Every time I sat at that table and decided that what they thought of me was not going to determine what I thought of myself. That compounded into the woman who walked out of their house on a cold Saturday night and didn't look back at the fountain. I think that's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this. Not the money. Not the leverage. Not the dramatic turn at the dinner table. Those are just the visible part, the part underneath. The years of choosing to keep going when nobody was clapping for you. The discipline of building a self that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. That's the part that actually matters. Vivienne didn't win because of the portfolio. She won because she never stopped believing the portfolio was possible, even when the people at the head of the table had already decided the ending for her. The work you do when nobody's watching is the most honest work you'll ever do. And someday, even if it's just for yourself, it will speak for you in rooms you couldn't have imagined.